Hey, I'm Kevin. Welcome back, or welcome for the first time. Thank you for joining me today. Well, whether you're new to playing the uke or you've been playing for years, today we're going to talk about some tips and suggestions, things that I wish I had known when I first started playing. They're going to help save you time and save you stress. So let's get to number one. Hey, before we get started, make sure you hit that like button, subscribe, and click that alert bell so you know when the next video is coming your way. If you're interested in more learning resources, head over to allforuke.com where we have a full searchable library of songs, song sheets, practice tracks, worksheets, and more. All for you, allforuke.com. Number one. All right, so number one is a big concept, and maybe the most important concept that you'll learn along the way is landing your fingers simultaneously. So when you're playing a one-finger chord like C or A minor, kind of those first couple of chords that you start to learn, well, easy. You only have to worry about one finger landing. But as you get into 2 and 3 and 4 finger chords, landing at the same time becomes paramount. So let's take an example here with our F chord. So with an F chord, I have 2 fingers involved here. I'm on the 2nd fret and the 1st fret with my middle and index finger. So something that I like to do to kind of practice this is I'll take and play my chord, my F chord, and then what I'll do is I'll lift my fingers up off the strings and I'll try to keep them in place. I'm trying to keep this chord shape in my hand. So I'm not releasing my hand like this. I'm still keeping the formation of the chord with my fingers so that I can land it back down at the same time. When you do this, you don't even need to strum. You just kind of keep the strumming hand out of the equation and just focus completely on your fretting hand here. So I lift the chord up, I set it back down, and I feel that sensation of my fingers both hitting the strings at the same time simultaneously. So I would start maybe with my 2-finger chords and just work on that. You can do this in front of the TV if you're just kind of passively practicing. You don't want to bother anybody else. These are good little exercises to really focus on a specific component of your playing. Now, a 3-finger chord as an example, the G chord. This is one that we come across and I find with a lot of my students that they start kind of building the chord 1 finger at a time, which is going to slow you down. And when you hit that chord in a chord progression, it's really going to cause that little hiccup to happen. So what I like to do, again, is I'll take this chord, get all my fingers in good position. I'm also making sure that my chord shape is in a nice position here too. If I find myself with my hand slipping down, I want to make sure that I'm up in a good playing position here. And again, I pull the chord off. I've kept that shape in my hand and I set it back down. So this is really something where you have to kind of focus your eyes on your hand and really use your mental control to kind of get your fingers to do what you want them to do, because they will try to get a little squirmish on you at times, especially as you get into 3 and 4 finger chords. So lift off, set back down. Try doing that 20, 30, 40 times in a row, and then you'll notice as you go back to play that chord progression, it's going to be a lot easier to grab that chord. So there's the 3-finger chord example. And then another one that I wanted to discuss a little bit here is the B flat chord, because now we're getting into using a bar shape. So again, with the B flat chord, it looks like this. You can check out the diagram. But when I land this chord now, we definitely have the propensity to go index, middle, ring, where you really want to go all of them at the same time, and that means I'm required to kind of keep my hand in a good position here above the fretboard. So when I'm switching to that B flat chord, my fingers are already lined up with the strings, and then as I go to grab the strings, I kind of already have that shape in position. So when you get to your B flat chord or maybe your B minor chord, what you want to do is grab that chord, fret it, lift your fingers off, and you only have to go off maybe 1 centimeter to 1 inch and kind of just grab back down with that chord, and just do that as many times as your heart desires. And I promise if you keep doing this, every time you come across a challenging chord, that chord's going to work out for you better when you put it in a progression. So number 1 is simply getting all those fingers to land simultaneously on the strings. Number 2. The next concept that I want to discuss is hovering and fretboard proximity. So what I'm talking about here is when I'm moving between chords, keeping my fingers in the best possible position to get to the next chord. So let's say, for instance, we're playing a C chord here, but we want to move to a G chord. Well, if I'm playing my C chord and my fingers are sitting down here below the neck and they're out of position, and I need to go to my G chord, well, I kind of have a little bit of a distance here to get to my G chord. So instead of doing that, what I'm going to do is, while I'm playing my C chord, I'm going to hover my fingers over the chord that I'm going to. So that's the main concept here that we want to work on. So when you're playing a chord, take your additional fingers and get them ready to move to the next chord. So when I'm playing C, I have my ring finger on the A string of the 3rd fret, but you notice now my index and my middle finger, which are going to this G chord shape, are already sitting here right above the C and the A string, so that when I want to move to my G chord, I lift my ring, and I'm going to take concept number 1 here, and I'm going to try to land all of those fingers at the same time. So this kind of goes right along with number 1 as you hover and move to that next chord. So this is another exercise here where you don't need to strum. If you want to check to make sure that you're getting the chord down, you can do single strums, kind of play C and then set that G chord down, kind of go back and forth. Now this might not be the chord that's a challenge for you. It might be some other chord change, but you can apply this concept by taking and finding what fingers you have available and where that next chord is, and kind of finding that little map to get to the next chord. So another example that I kind of have come across many times is going from A minor to G. Well, typically, a lot of us play A minor with our middle finger here on the G string of the 2nd fret, and then going from here to the G chord, I kind of have to move all of my fingers to get down there. So a little shortcut you could try is taking and playing A minor with your index finger, and that allows me to hover my middle and ring finger down here above the E and the A string, so that when I'm playing A minor, I'm hovering those fingers in position over G, and then when I want to make that move, my fingers are right there to lay down on the strings. And now the second component of this is finger proximity to the fretboard. I don't want my fingers lifted an inch, 4 inches above the fretboard. I want my fingers kind of hovering as close as I can get them without touching the strings, because path of least resistance, if I just have a short distance to go, I can get to that chord. So when you insert a strumming pattern or a finger picking pattern and you're having to move chords a little bit faster, all of this chord work that you're doing now is going to go into your playing, so you can make those moves happen a lot more smoothly. Last example here, a lot of us come across, is an A and a D chord. Well, when you're playing the A chord here on the G and the C strings, and you're moving to the D chord, well, you'll notice that you kind of have your ring and your pinky available to you here. So rather than kind of keeping them off, do your fingers ever look like this, where they're kind of pointing out away from the uke? Well, try to keep them rounded. I always kind of use a rule of thumb that I want to see my fingernails kind of facing right back up at me. If I look down and see my fingernails, I know that I have a nice good curvature in my hand as I go to that chord. So I have my fingers in place here, and sometimes you can't get them all the way perfectly to the position of the next chord, but you can get them close. I have my fingers here about 1 centimeter off of the strings, so that when I go to this D shape, I'm nice and close, grabbing that chord. So finger proximity to the fretboard and hovering is another general concept you can use for any time you come across a chord. Kind of use that formula of picking your additional fingers, figuring out what little shortcuts you can make to get to that next chord. If you're digging the sound of my uke, head over to allforuke.com/shop. You can have a Kala ukulele for yourself. When you buy your Kala ukulele through All for Uke, you're supporting us, and we really appreciate it. Make sure you check it out. Concerts, sopranos, tenors, baritones, a wide selection of accessories, capos, and more. All for you, allforuke.com/shop. Number 3. The final concept that I want to discuss today is called pivoting. So pivoting, we've heard this term maybe in sports, but when we're talking about the uke or any stringed instruments, pivoting is using a finger that is shared between the two chords to make a move. So for instance, if I'm going from F and my second chord is G7, well, I don't play my F chord here, pick up all of my fingers, and then drop them back down on G7. What I'll use is my index finger as a pivot, kind of as a fulcrum to get down to that next chord. So here's my F chord. My index finger is already playing the E string on the first fret, which is the same place it's going to be for the G7 chord. So as I play that chord, I use my index finger to kind of swivel and pivot my hand down to a G7. So I'll do that nice and slow here. And again, I'm using some of the earlier concepts from today. I'm hovering my ring finger above the A string where it's going to be going. And I'm landing my middle and ring finger at the same time on the strings. So that little pivot just saved me a bunch of time going between those two chords. Now, let's say there's not really a pivot in place already for me, but this is a common chord that I always see going between. That's always a challenge at first, and that's going from C to E minor. So the C chord, we typically play ring finger on the A string, 3rd fret, and then we need to go to our E minor chord, which is this little staircase here on the 4th, 3rd, and 2nd fret. Well, what we can do is we can create a pivot. So this is a little chord trick that I'm going to share with you here. So instead of playing my C chord with my ring finger, I'm going to play it with my middle finger. And the reason I'm doing that is because I want to create a pivot finger, and that's going to be my index finger again. So my index finger, when I'm playing E minor, is on the 2nd fret of the A string. So if I already have that in place, when I go to make that move from C to E minor, now I can pivot off of my index finger to get there. So I have my index and my middle finger down on the A string of the 2nd and 3rd fret, and then I'm going to pivot here up to my E minor chord. So I didn't do a very good job of it that time, but what you want to do is have your ring finger already hovering above the C string to where it's going, and now the movement that you make is just getting your middle finger to that E string. So look at how much less movement is required than this, sweeping my whole chord and trying to land at the same time versus having a pivot and hovering. So here's my pivot index. I move my middle finger up to the E string, drop my ring finger down. I do that simultaneously, and now I have the E minor chord. So that's creating a pivot or using a finger. So this is another general concept. Anytime that you find a chord progression, start kind of pulling it apart chord by chord. Look at each chord individually, see if there are any shared fingers between the chords, or if you have an additional finger or you maybe play a chord with a different fingering, try to use this concept of finding a pivot finger or creating a pivot finger to make the chord change happen faster. Well, thank you so much for watching today, and I really appreciate you learning with me. Please let me know, are there some chords that you've come across where you've kind of thought to yourself, how do I get my fingers down at the same time? How do I get to that next chord? Leave those in the comments below. I'd love to hear about your experiences learning chords. And also let me know, do you like these videos that are kind of more based on tips and tricks and suggestions? We'll do more, or if you have any other suggestions, you can leave them below as well. I also want to mention we have a PDF for this lesson at allforuke.com, where I've expanded upon these tips, put together some chord exercises where you can work on some of these concepts in real time. So thank you so much for watching. My name's Kevin. I'll see you next time.
Let's get